The date is March 26, 2012. My name is Paul Robards, Library Director at Roberts Memorial Library. I will be speaking with John Blanks Jr. today about his experiences in the Vietnam War. Mr. Blanks, what branch of the military did you serve in?
I was in the U.S. Army Infantry.
Why did you join the military?
I started the military as a career. I had been to a military high school, went to military college, and the next obvious step was to go into the military as a career.
How old were you when you joined the military?
20, excuse me.
Where did you receive basic training?
Actually, the basic training, I was in the special group basic training down at Fort Benning, and I took a special basic training out at Fort Carson, Colorado.
Where did you attend advanced training, and how long did it last?
Fort Benning, Georgia.
Hoorah.
I believe it was 9 weeks long, I think.
Hoorah.
Yeah.
Did this training sufficiently prepare you for your duties in Vietnam?
Well, actually, two deals there. At one time, I was also, prior to the advanced course, I was an instructor at Fort Benning to the advanced course. So I actually designed the curriculum for using mortars, both 4.2 and 81 millimeters. So part of that I was already aware of when I went down there to Fort Benning.
Outstanding. What was your occupation code?
I was a 1542 light infantry leader.
Did you volunteer to go to Vietnam?
I did the first time.
How did you feel when you learned you were going to Vietnam?
That's a very good question because I had mixed feelings. I understandably had mixed emotions concerning RBM. On one hand, I was excited. On the other, I was apprehensive about what to expect and the dangers I knew that were awaiting me there. Since I was a career soldier, I was in a way actually looking forward to testing myself while leading my men into combat. The worst feeling that I had was having to leave my family. The separation was particularly hard on the wives.
What dates did you serve in Southeast Asia?
I was in Southeast Asia twice. I was there part of 66, 67, 68, and 69. In 66, I was there from June of 66 to June of 67, and then from October of 68 to October of 69. First tour I was with the 101st Airborne Division. The second tour I was with the AmeriCal Division up in I Corps.
What was your rank during the war?
First tour I was Lieutenant Company Commander. The second tour I was a Captain Company Commander.
What was your first encounter with the enemy?
The first encounter with the enemy was when I was on a patrol with my platoon into a village that we thought was deserted. But after we entered into the village, we came under fire from a Viet Cong unit. The encounter occurred shortly after I was assigned to my unit, and when the action began, my men did exactly what they were trained to do. We routed the VC, and none of my men were wounded or killed. I called it a successful first encounter.
How would you evaluate the enemy's fighting ability?
They were very good fighters because it was their country. Most of them were more dedicated to their cause than the U.S. soldiers were. Their overall strengths were adaptability, stealth, and ability to use any and everything as a weapon against us. They were very determined, and special squads, usually the North Vietnamese regulars, were specifically trained, and we called them sappers. They generally, specialty was crawling into the barbed wire barriers unnoticed and throwing satchel charges into our positions. They were generally suicide squads, and they could really wreak havoc on us.
What weapon did you use the most often with the most efficiency?
It depended on the situation. I had several weapons that I used. I had, of course, my M16. I also had a grease gun, which was a 45 caliber blowback automatic weapon. I had a 45 caliber pistol, a 32 automatic, and also a combat knife. When I was going into tunnels, I used my 32 and my knife. If we were in very, very thick brush, and I was operating more on my own, which I was in a lot of instances during the second half of both of my tours, I was using primarily the grease gun and my M16. While actually working with my unit, my primary weapon was my M16 rifle.
Describe the bravest action you witnessed during the war.
Let me think about that a minute. The bravest action is sort of hard to determine. Let me check my notes here, because I had one specific instance that was there. Probably the bravest action that I saw was done by our company commander. At one time, we were up in the Dak To area, and we were being overrun by an NVA division, and my company commander actually ended up, to protect us, called napalm in on our own position. None of us were hurt by it. They were very, very accurate. But it busted up their particular assault on us, and we were able to turn the tide.
What do you remember most about combat?
It was scary as hell. It was either complete or total boredom, or complete and total chaos. For a line unit, there was never anything in between. The most memorable thing was flying in on an air assault mission. You never knew what was going to happen once you hit the ground in the landing zone. If it was hot, that would be the enemy shooting at you when you landed. It was really scary. Another frightening unknown was when you were moving through the jungle, not knowing exactly if you were being watched, or if someone was taking a bead on you, or you were walking into an ambush.
What awards did you receive?
The awards I received 4 Bronze Stars, 5 Army Commendation Medals, Air Medal, Purple Heart, Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with Palm, Vietnamese Staff Medal First Class, National Defense Service Medal, Vietnam Service Medal, Vietnam Campaign Medal. I think that's all of them. Most of them anyway.
What is your evaluation of American military leadership in Vietnam and of your immediate commanders in the field?
You had good and you had bad. A lot of times you would run into a commander that was just there, and this would probably be at the battalion level, probably an individual that was relatively close to his career, and in my opinion he was trying to get his card punched for the next promotion, and they were not really the most astute in the combat area. They had been desk jockeys for quite a few years before that, and they had volunteered to go so they could get their card punched. That would be the other extreme. The one extreme, the extreme that I ran into most, were officers who were extremely competent. They were very astute in planning operation. They had tremendous control over the happenings there, and the men loved the heck out of them.
As a young serviceman, did you understand the politics and the diplomacy of both the United States and Vietnam that resulted in a war?
I'm an old man now, and I still don't understand what that was. I assume that they thought that they could stop the communist menace from toppling Southeast Asia one country at a time, but it's really, really bad when you've got politicians who've never even been in the service, much less been in combat, trying to run a war from Washington, D.C., and to appease all the people who are against the war.
How did your understanding of the situation affect how you did your job?
Had no effect on it whatsoever. My job was to accomplish my mission with the least loss of my personnel and to get as many of them back home alive as I could.
Roger that. Describe your living conditions, housing, and food in Vietnam.
Well, if you want to call it housing, while you're in the field, my housing was a hammock that I liberated from a VC who did not need it anymore. And I slept in the hammock primarily because of the fact that I didn't want to sleep on the ground because of the ground leeches. They were attracted to heat, and if you were sleeping on the ground, you were very apt to wake up in the morning in a medevac helicopter with leeches all inside every cavity of your body while you were asleep. I put a couple of sandbags around my hammock, and it was also a lot easier to get out of if you had to get under attack. Now, while we were in base camp, which was not very often, In a combat unit, well, the units I was in anyway, we would stay out in the field anywhere from 60 to 80 days at a time without going back into for resupply or any type of off duty from the actual operation itself. But when we did get back there, we had tents that were sandbagged, and it was sort of a compound area surrounded by barbed wire fence, and had regular mess halls, had the same food as we had if you had been back stateside, prepared a little differently in some instances, but still the same basic food, same basic menu. In the base camp, you also had movies every now and then. So base camp was a little bit of a respite from being out in the woods, so to speak.
What was your daily routine while in Vietnam?
There really wasn't any daily routine for combat units. You were either in the field on operations, some lasting, as indicated, in excess of 60 days at a time, or you were in base camp resting, recuperating, resupplying, and wait to be sent out on another operation. Most of the time on operations, we were just walking through the jungle from point A to point B, looking for an enemy who didn't want to be found. When and if we found them, that's when all hell would break loose into a firefight. Sometimes we came out without a scratch, other times we weren't so lucky. Most of the time, the biggest problem we were dealing with was actually jungle rot, leeches, heat, humidity, eternal rain during the monsoon season, and all of the insects and snakes.
Did you ever do anything just for the fun of it?
R&R was always fun. In the field, about all you could do was read books your family had sent you, play cards every now and then. Nothing really fun, because you're always alert against being attacked. When in base camp, there were officers and enlisted clubs, usually just modified tents, where you could socialize, have a few drinks, play a slot machine, or just simply relax a little bit. Everyone looked forward to the 1 week of R&R, which was rest and recuperation. You'd be out of Vietnam and have not a worry in the world, complete relaxation in some very nice places like Malaysia, Hong Kong, Thailand, Hawaii, Australia, and a few other locations. I was even able to meet my wife in Hawaii for one of my R&Rs.
Please tell us about any community involvement you participated in, such as irrigation or construction projects.
That I did an awful lot in. The second half of both of my tours, I was actually as an S5, which is the Civil Affairs. And as Civil Affairs, I worked directly with the Vietnamese people. The most fun part of that is I was in charge of price control in the villages, and every time I walked into a store, the prices would drop like that. But during that particular period of time, we, with the 101st, for instance, we gave scholarships to the high schools that we had there, took up collections within the division or the brigade at that particular time, and they have to pay to go to high school, and a lot of them could not. So we had some scholarship round, and since we were the 101st, we actually gave 101 scholarships to deserving Vietnamese children. I was very much involved in coordinating the operation of several of the engineering units, building playgrounds. Also during the Christmas season, we would pass out Christmas presents to the regional forces, popular forces who were encamped, and they were sort of like the National Guard and local militia. And all they had with them was their wife and kids, and that's about all they had except for an old carbine. And they didn't have a lot of supplies, so each Christmas we would give them presents, and that was very rewarding. The second, also one of the things we did a lot of was the medical civic action programs, where we would go into a village and we would basically set up shop. It would be myself as the S5, several of the medics from the battalion, and in a lot of instances the battalion surgeon would go in with us depending on the security of the area. On a couple of occasions, we even had some of the Red Cross girls go into the area with us if it was secure enough. The rest of the time, you were doing a lot of work with the Montagnard tribesmen up in the mountains. They were just about 2 years past the caveman, still hunting with crossbows, and very, very loyal to the South. and then obviously the United States. And they were awfully good fighters too, because they definitely knew the area. In fact, a lot of them were joined in on the South Vietnamese Tiger Force units. Found a lot of them there. But I was very much involved in some of the civic affairs areas going through there.
Could you tell me about the most memorable event that happened to you or your unit while serving in Vietnam?
There are far too many to narrow it down to just one, but one occurred shortly after an operation after I'd arrived in my unit. We were trying to recover the body of a fallen comrade from within a minefield. By the time we were able to reach his dead body, we had to clear the mines out first. Several days had passed, and in the heat of Vietnam, the body was all bloated and covered with maggots. Another time we were under attack, and I went to get some wounded men out of harm's way so their wounds could be treated while trying not to become a casualty myself. Another involved chasing some VC who had captured one of our guys. Before we could reach them, they bound the captive and executed him right there in a rice paddy and were gone. We were actually on an operation. I had my company in My Lai almost a year to the date after Callie had his famed experience there. And while I was giving instructions to one of my platoon leaders, he was shot in the leg by a sniper. I always think that was almost me. Fortunately, the leg wound wasn't life-threatening and my lieutenant was sent home. We used to call that the $1 million wound because you went home alive and with all of your limbs still attached. One more because they all bear repeating again and again so people would know what the war is all about. Our firebase was under attack of an NVA unit. An enemy rocket-propelled grenade was launched into a bunker where our battalion chaplain, Chaplain Chuck Savely, he was a Lutheran chaplain, as I remember, and his assistant was seeking protection. They were obviously non-combatants. The explosion killed Chuck's assistant and eviscerated Chuck. Chuck was a bachelor, and the last I heard about him, when he was in the field hospital recovering from his wound, he had his intestines wrapped on the outside of his stomach with a wet towel around him, chasing nurses around the hospital.
Did you ever feel that the American public was less than enthusiastic about those who served in Vietnam?
Oh, absolutely. They hated us, and they didn't know the first thing about it. I can remember several instances that really just rubbed me sort of the wrong way. One of them occurred with my wife. We were just finishing up R&R, and I was headed back to Vietnam. I'd met her in Hawaii, and after I'd left on a very sad day to return to Vietnam to finish my tour of duty, she went to have her hair done, and to keep her mind off the danger I was going to face yet one more time. While she was in the salon chair, the hairdresser asked us how it felt to sleep with a baby killer. That, in my opinion, was totally and completely out of place and uncalled for. Also, while I was in Vietnam, I received a package. We always enjoyed receiving packages. It was always like Christmas come early. This package particularly, however, I regret receiving. It was from an anonymous individual who sent me a box of soap with a letter inside stating that I should use this soap to wash the baby corpses that I had killed. I don't know who the SOB was that sent it, nor where it came from, but we did not kill any babies. The other thing about it, when we returned from protecting our country, stretch maybe, but at least when we returned from doing the duty that our country had sent us to, we were mocked, cursed at, spat upon, just in the way our loved ones should have been treated. Unfortunately, the events like this numbered in thousands. I remember one time in particular after one of my tours, we were going to an assignment and didn't know about the motels, anything to stay in, and we were traveling. So we stayed in one motel, and each time you were changing post, you had a sponsor. And our sponsor asked us where we were, and I told him the hotel we were staying in, and he said, do not, under any circumstances, wear your uniform. That is a couple of the things that is something that needs to be stated. And also, we do not ever, as the Vietnam vets, we never received, not that I wanted it or anything, but a lot of the other guys needed it, any acclaim for anything we had done, any appreciation for what we had done. And like I said, when you walk back into the airport, people would spit on you if you had your uniform on. Much, much contrary to what is happening now. It does my heart good when I see the guys coming back from Afghanistan, Iraq, when they were over there, and everybody as they walk through in a unit stands up and just gives them a round of applause. We never got that.
Have your views about the war changed over the years?
Not really. I was looking at it as just another assignment in the career. It probably got a little bit more tainted after my first tour there, when I saw what was actually occurring within the politics of the war, let's say. It did not seem that the commanders, and I'm talking about the general levels and the politicians, were interested in anything more than body count. If you had a lot of body count, they gave you a bunch of medals. If you didn't have any body count, they relieved the commanders of their chain of their command. Put somebody else in there they thought get more body count. They were not really, in my opinion, concerned about what the soldiers, at least the ones that I knew, thought it was all about.
Would you repeat this experience if you could do it over again?
Oh, absolutely.
Why or why not?
Absolutely. The people that I served with were some of the finest people that I've ever served with. It was quite a brotherhood. I probably wouldn't volunteer, but I wouldn't run the other way to Canada if I was called up, simply because of the fact that it's very, very hard on the families, the wives and children, when we're really, really bad, because they never know what's happening. Nowadays, it's a little bit better. I remember my wife saying that she used to sit in front of the TV watching the news, hoping to catch a glimpse of me or my unit to find out where we were. Whereas nowadays, they're right in your face when your RV gets blown up.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to share about your Vietnam War experience?
I think that a lot of Vietnam was not only funny, but interesting. I can remember on one occasion, probably the most humorous thing that happened to me. We had done some work with this Montagnard village, and the village chief was throwing this great big banquet in honor of me and a couple of the people that had participated in the civic action program that we were working with. They had this large banquet, and they had this large crock, probably 2 to 3 feet across in a round bowl. Had a crust of something on top of it about a half of an inch, and they had these long straws coming out of it. You would stick your straw through the crust, and it was some of the most potent adult beverages that you could ever come across. Then they passed around the meal. The meal was a very interesting meal, too, since it was the Montagnards. The meal consisted of a combination of rat and rice. Now, it wasn't the gray city rats. It was the brown field rats, which you saw like eating like squirrel or rabbit. But it still had an interesting taste because it was all cooked outside over the little grill. And then when we got ready to break it up, one of the people from the village came over and presented this plate with a chicken head in the middle of it to me. And the village chief was over here to my left, and my interpreter was to my right. And I looked at this chicken head and didn't know what I was supposed to do with it. So I turned over to my interpreter and said, "What am I supposed to do with this chicken head?" He said, "Well, you're supposed to eat it because you're the guest of honor." And I ate an awful lot of stuff in Vietnam, and I draw the line at eating chicken heads. So what I had to do is do a little quick thinking. So I turned over to the village chief and told him that I was just not worthy of this particular honor. Then since he was the village chief and he was the hero of this village, that he should eat the chicken head. He was happy because he got elevated, and I was happy because I didn't have to eat the chicken head.